Friends, good afternoon. Thank you for being here for the book launch of Unrequited Love, Duterte's China Embrace. I'm Paterno Esmaquel, and I am your host for today. Before we begin, we would like to acknowledge the presence of special guests, Senator Risa Hontiveros, Department of Foreign Affairs spokesperson Ambassador Maria Teresita Daza, Ambassador David Hartman, First Secretary John Shelton, and Second Secretary Sejal Tiwari of the Embassy of Canada, First Secretary Shigehiro Matsuda of the Embassy of Japan, Second Secretary Quan Le of the Embassy of Vietnam, Deputy Director Logeventan Karupanan of the Embassy of Singapore, Deputy Press Attaché Glenda Wallace of the Embassy of the United States, Department of Finance Undersecretary Nino Raymond Alvina, Presidential Communications Office Assistant Secretary Michael Andre Del Rosario, National Artist for Literature Virgilio Almario, former Senator Laila De Lima, former Supreme Court Senior Associate Justice Antonio Carpio, former Supreme Court Associate Justice Conchita Carpio Morales, and Dean Fernando Paragas of the UP College of Mass Communication. Let us all give them a warm round of applause. Thank you all for spending your afternoon with us as we celebrate the launch of this highly anticipated book, Unrequited Love, Duterte's China Embrace by Marites Vitug and Camille Elemia, is published by the Ateneo de Manila University Press. This book launch is made possible by the support of the Institute of Maritime and Ocean Affairs, a private, non-profit corporation that conducts research, studies, and fora on maritime and ocean affairs of the Republic of the Philippines. To begin this program, the opening remarks will be given by the legal luminary known for his staunch defense of the West Philippine Sea. Former Senior Associate Justice Antonio Carpio was a member of the Philippine Supreme Court for 18 years, from 2001 to 2019. A valedictorian and cum laude graduate of the UP College of Law, Justice Carpio began his government service in 1992 as Chief Presidential Legal Counsel of President Fidel V. Ramos, who awarded him the Presidential Medal of Merit in 1998. In 2017, he published the book, The South China Sea Dispute, Philippine Sovereign Rights and Jurisdiction in the West Philippine Sea. He is currently chairperson of One Sambayan and chairperson of the Institute for Maritime and Ocean Affairs. Let us all welcome Justice Antonio Carpio.
Distinguished guests, friends, ladies and gentlemen, a pleasant afternoon to everyone. Let me warmly welcome you to this book launching of Unrequited Love, Duterte's China Embrace by Marites Vitug and Camille Elemia. This is a gathering of Filipinos who have taken up the patriotic duty of defending what belongs to the Philippines in the West Philippine Sea. This is a gathering of Filipinos who welcomed with jubilation the landmark July 12, 2016 Arbitral Award, only to be crushed with utter dismay soon after, even before the ink had dried, when then President Rodrigo Duterte called the Arbitral Award a scrap of paper that should be thrown to the wastebasket, parroting verbatim the Chinese propaganda line. Then President Duterte even unashamedly said of the very person who claimed credit for seizing Philippine island territories and maritime zones in the West Philippine Sea, and I quote, "I simply love President Xi Jinping," end of quote. That love has glaringly been unrequited, as the book we launched today clearly explains. We who are defending the West Philippine Sea in media and in talk shows, in conferences and in courtrooms, in people power in the streets and in the sea, in cyberspace and on tiny rocky islands, have neither the time nor journalistic skill to weave together into a complete story our various initiatives and struggles. Thankfully, Marites Vitug masterfully put together for posterity in the blockbuster thriller Rock Solid, the story of how we won the landmark Arbitral Award of July 12, 2016. Today, in Unrequited Love, the sequel to Rock Solid, Marites Vitug and Camille Elemia again masterfully weave together into a coherent whole for posterity our painful struggles in defending the West Philippine Sea during those terrible years when President Duterte, while in office, acted as the principal defender of China in the West Philippine Sea against Philippine national interests. Then President Duterte instructed our Navy to patrol only our territorial sea and not our exclusive economic zone, violating the command of the Constitution that the state shall protect its marine wealth in its exclusive economic zone. Then President Duterte allowed Chinese fishermen to fish in our exclusive economic zone, violating the command of the Constitution that the fish in our exclusive economic zone is reserved exclusively to Filipinos. Then President Duterte, the Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of the Philippines, even declared in his State of the Nation address that he is inutil when it comes to defending the West Philippine Sea from Chinese encroachment. In the annals of Philippine history, that makes former President Duterte the only Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces to publicly confess to being inutil in his sworn constitutional duty to defend Philippine territory and maritime zones. Unsurprisingly, former President Duterte's love affair with China has blossomed against a background of wheeling and dealing by his Chinese friends in the Farmally scandal, involving government contracts amounting to tens of billions of pesos of COVID-19 paraphernalia. This is vividly narrated in Unrequited Love. We are eternally grateful to Marites Vitug and Camille Elemia for recording and preserving, as a lesson for present and future generations of Filipinos, a glaring aberration in Philippine history when a sitting president went rogue in subordinating Philippine national interest to the interest of a foreign invader. We hope and pray that this will be the first and last time such a catastrophe will befall upon our beloved country. Once again, a warm welcome to everyone. Mabuhay ang Pilipinas, ating ang West Philippine Sea. Thank you, and may God bless us all.
Thank you, Justice Carpio, for beginning this program on an insightful note. Now we will hear from one of the notable reviewers of Unrequited Love, Duterte's China Embrace. Senator Risa Hontiveros has been a member of the Philippine Senate since 2016. Senator Hontiveros is known for leading Senate investigations into corruption in government, including an ongoing probe into POGOs run by Chinese syndicates. She is a multi-awarded women's rights advocate, activist, and former broadcast journalist who was nominated for the prestigious Nobel Peace Prize in 2005 for her work in the peace movement. May we all give a warm welcome to Senator Risa Hontiveros.
Salamat po. Magandang hapon po sa inyong lahat, mga kababayan. And good afternoon to our dear international partners. To Marites Vitug and Camille Elemia, isang malakas na mabuhay for this book. Woo! If any of you have followed my interventions in the Senate when it comes to China's incursions into the West Philippine Sea, I almost always refer to Marites' earlier work, Rock Solid, how the Philippines won its maritime case against China. It gave me a much, much deeper appreciation, not only for the significance of the 2016 Arbitral Award, but also for all the people who were on the front lines of that legal and diplomatic battle. People like the esteemed former Supreme Court Senior Associate Justice Antonio Carpio, who has continued to inspire in all of us the drive, grit, and courage to stand up to a bully. Rock Solid is such a rich resource, a treasure trove of facts and stories that serve like a Bible of sorts for those who want to defend our sovereignty. So you can imagine my excitement when I heard that Marites had started working on a new book, this time with another terrific journalist, Camille. Unrequited Love, Duterte's China Embrace, as I wrote in my blurb for the book, is a damning record of the former president's long-running relationship with China. It affirms what we had already known, that there has been no president in the history of the Philippines who has so brazenly, so openly, so shamelessly sold our country out to China like Duterte. That the former president loves China is not a surprise. What the book has revealed, and is quite shocking, is how deep and long this affair with China has been going on. It's as though the Filipino people were duped into a relationship with Duterte in 2016 without fully knowing that his loyalty and affection were for somebody else. It should have been already a bright red flag when on July 12, 2016, as we received news of the landmark Hague ruling, the Duterte administration chose to stay mum, to act as if this victory didn't put our country in the annals of history, to diminish the power that it gave the Philippines in this difficult and grating intergenerational fight against China. Fresh from being elected to the highest office of the land, his deafening silence on the 2016 Arbitral Award was a premonition of things to come, not only in terms of our foreign policy, but also in terms of national governance and politics. As soon as he took office, it became clear that he was going to pivot away from our traditional allies, who'd made long-standing collective commitments to uphold human rights and the international rules-based order. As soon as he was president, Duterte, riding on the populist wave, persisted with his single-issue message on the war on drugs, a message that created a climate of fear, impunity, and violence among our people. A narrative that allowed him to employ classic political theatrics by persecuting political enemies, with former Senator Laila de Lima as a central figure. A story that created villains out of journalists, the media, us in the opposition, and all other democracy-loving nations which condemned and sought accountability for his murderous drug war. As part of the minority during the Duterte administration, it was frustrating to witness how very rarely he or China were called out. It felt like we in the minority were alone in pushing back against his proclivity towards autocratic regimes. In fact, when Duterte announced that the Philippines was going to withdraw from the Rome Statute, the treaty that established the International Criminal Court, only 6 of us then in the minority resisted. Only the 6 of us, former Senators Frank Drilon, Kiko Pangilinan, Bam Aquino, Laila de Lima, Sonny Trillanes, and me, from the Senate, asked the Supreme Court to void the Duterte-mandated withdrawal from the ICC. But our effort was essentially pushed aside. Duterte, resting easy on the loyalty of his acolytes, had his way. When the Philippines did terminate our relations with the ICC, that established Duterte's image as an international pariah and resulted in him relying on China even further. Nonetheless, we all kept pushing back, kept resisting, kept calling him out. I remember when he downplayed the 2019 incident in which Chinese crewmen abandoned Filipino fishermen after a collision at Recto Bank. I demanded that he apologize to the Filipino people for lawyering for China, that he stop being subservient to China, and that he actually fight for our national interest. But as this book clearly portrays, Duterte's unconditional love for China knew no limits. All throughout his presidency, he doggedly defended China, even when hundreds of Chinese ships were seen swarming Julian Felipe Reef in the middle of the pandemic, even when Filipino ships were constantly harassed and threatened by the Chinese Coast Guard, even when promises of China funding infrastructure projects went unkept. What is worse, even well after his presidency, the ghost of his China pivot still looms large over us. Just a few months ago, the Chinese embassy in Manila alleged that there had been a gentleman's agreement between Duterte and Beijing. An agreement that Philippine vessels and aircraft would refrain from coming closer than 12 nautical miles from Panatag or Scarborough Shoal, just over 120 nautical miles from mainland Zambales, and well within our exclusive economic zone. An agreement to not repair or rebuild structures at Ayungin Shoal, to not reinforce our most important sovereignty marker, the BRP Sierra Madre. If true, these were agreements that were kept in secret and hidden away from the Filipino people. That is why I filed proposed Senate Resolution number 984 to look into this treasonous gentleman's agreement. And I did so because there are serious, potentially divisive allegations. These are serious because the first gentleman's agreement effectively diminishes our sovereignty by conceding a no-go zone for Philippine ships and aircraft inside our own EEZ, as well as the unlawful occupation of Panatag Shoal by a foreign power. The second risks our tenuous hold in Ayungin. If we do not repair and reinforce the BRP Sierra Madre, it will, as Justice Carpio warned, fall to wind and wave. And with it, our control over Reed Bank, which may hold as much as 5.4 billion barrels of oil and 55.1 trillion cubic feet of natural gas. The news about this so-called gentleman's agreement came out after I had already received the first manuscript of this book, which only goes to show how there may still be more that we do not yet know about Duterte's special relationship with China. Perhaps we might need to watch out for an Unrequited Love Part 2. But of course, this book in itself is already a revelation. It details how a small-time mayor from the south of the Philippines long nurtured a relationship with a big-time superpower. How he curated a space where local politics, business interests, and international relations could all intermingle to suit his personal ambitions. How the relationships he's built have become the bane of an entire nation's existence. The extensive historical and contextual information in the book is highly commendable. The authors were even able to trace how the notorious Michael Yang became part of Duterte's inner circle. Michael Yang, who became his economic presidential advisor. The same Michael Yang who was implicated in the Farmally scandal. The same Michael Yang who seems to also have ties with crime-infested pogos. In fact, in our most recent expose, we found that Michael Yang's brother, Yang Hongjiang, has a joint bank account with one Yu Zhengkan, an incorporator of the raided pogo in Bamban, Tarlac. Yes, we discovered that the company of the infamous Mayor Alice Guo, or Guo Huaping, has direct transactions with this joint bank account. In short, Michael Yang's brother was funding the pogo in Bamban. And according to our research, during Duterte's time, the Yang brothers went to Beijing to attend a Chinese Communist Party-sponsored conference as Philippine representatives of the All-China Federation of Returned Overseas Chinese. It is truly outrageous that until now, even with Duterte out of power, the dark shadows of his administration still follow us. A darkness that can still return in the 2025 elections. A darkness that can once again envelop our nation for the years to come. The threat of a Duterte comeback is why books like Unrequited Love should be read and shared and explained and repeated as many times and as widely as possible. Unrequited Love is an important record of the sins of a Philippine president, of his unfaithfulness to his mandate, of his betrayal of the Filipino people. We need this record to make him accountable for his actions. We need this so we learn our lessons. Again, mabuhay at maraming salamat, Marites and Camille, for this book, for this historical record. We will all do our best to make the good use of this work. Salamat po sa panahon, mga kasama, at sa pakikiisa nating lahat sa isa't isa.
Thank you, Senator Hontiveros, for those thought-provoking words. For us to delve deeper into the highly relevant subject matter within the book, let me first introduce the authors of Unrequited Love, Duterte's China Embrace. Ms. Marites Vitug has been a journalist for more than 40 years. She began as a special reports writer at Business Day in the late 1970s and shifted to political beat reporting in 1983 after the assassination of Benigno Ninoy Aquino Jr. In 2001, Ms. Vitug co-founded the trailblazing investigative magazine Newsbreak, which she led as editor-in-chief and is now part of Rappler. On top of her work as reporter and editor, Ms. Vitug is the author of books such as Power from the Forest, The Politics of Logging, Under the Crescent Moon, Rebellion in Mindanao with Glenda M. Gloria, Shadow of Doubt, Probing the Supreme Court, and Rock Solid, How the Philippines Won its Maritime Case Against China. Ms. Vitug was a Nieman Fellow at Harvard University from 1986 to 1987 and later took postgraduate studies in international relations, graduating with merit at the London School of Economics and Political Science. She finished her undergraduate degree in broadcast communication at the University of the Philippines, Diliman. She is currently editor-at-large at Rappler. Ms. Vitug's co-author is Ms. Camille Elemia, an award-winning multimedia journalist known for her investigative reporting on Philippine politics, China's influence, and media and disinformation issues. She is a reporter for the New York Times and Radio Free Asia and its affiliate Benar News, and was formerly with Rappler and CNN Philippines. Ms. Elemia finished her undergraduate degree in communication research at the University of the Philippines, Diliman, and later graduated with a master's degree in journalism at Ateneo de Manila University under a Konrad Adenauer Stiftung Fellowship in 2016. In 2017, she won the International Labor Organization Global Media Competition on Labor Migration for her series on the plight of undocumented migrant workers in Southeast Asia. In 2019, she was one of 2 Filipinos awarded the prestigious Fulbright Hubert H. Humphrey Fellowship, which allowed her to spend a year in the U.S. to cover President Donald Trump's immigration policies, the 2020 presidential campaign, and the Filipino community. To give us a brief introduction to the book and what went behind it, let us now hear a few words from Ms. Marites Vitug.
Good afternoon, and thank you to all of you for coming despite the rains. So I'd like to take you back to October 20, 2016, which stands out in many people's memory. It was a cool autumn day in Beijing when President Rodrigo Duterte, on a state visit to China, made a major announcement to a crowd of Filipino and Chinese businessmen attending a trade and investment forum. In his usual incoherent way, he said, and I quote, "I announce my separation from the United States, both the military but economics also. I have separated from them, so I will be dependent on you for all times. But do not worry, we will also help as you help us." The ground shifted beneath our feet. It was a most dramatic twist in foreign policy that stunned many. Thus began the China pivot early in Duterte's presidency, only on his 4th month in office. He would continue to extol China. On April 19, 2018, he said, "As I just simply love Xi Jinping. He understands my problem and he is willing to help. More than anybody else at this time of our national life, I need China." And on May 31, 2019, swept by his fondness for a giant neighbor, he declared, "I love China." In the post-Marcos Sr. era, Duterte was the only president who openly and unabashedly embraced China. Thus the title of the book, Unrequited Love, Duterte's China Embrace. So more than 2 years ago, Camille, Elemia, and I started the journey that would lead to this book. I remember our first out-of-town field work was in Nueva Ecija, in a sprawling military camp where the 10,000-bed mega drug abuse treatment and rehabilitation center stood. It was the symbol of China's huge support for Duterte's centerpiece program. But as you will read in the book, it was a mega hype. In a way, hype characterized Duterte's relations with China. Of the long list of China's loan pledges for Duterte's infrastructure, only 3 came to fruition. This did not include the big-ticket Mindanao Railway project that Duterte promised in his first State of the Nation address. After Duterte's visit to China in October 2016, the big success his cabinet members announced was that Filipinos could return to Scarborough Shoal and fish. That was only part of the story. Yes, our fishermen could fish, but it was on again and off again. They were at the mercy of the Chinese Coast Guard. This, despite the International Tribunal's ruling that Scarborough Shoal is a traditional common fishing ground of Filipinos, Vietnamese, and Chinese. Unrequited Love chronicles more of these stories that show a one-sided affair, a kind of love story that took place amid the backdrop of waves of Chinese intrusions in the West Philippine Sea. But here's the comforting thought. In the end, Duterte failed to rally the country toward China. Various government institutions pushed back, from the armed forces to the security and diplomatic establishment. This, combined with the unpopularity of Duterte's pro-Beijing stance, thwarted his epic attempt. The book includes an epilogue that chronicles the ripples of change under President Bongbong Marcos. It's still a story in progress. Our relations with China, however, is a story that will be with us for generations. Thank you and good afternoon.
Thank you, Ms. Vitug, for that introduction. Now it is time to get to the heart of the day's program, which is, of course, our panel discussion. To moderate the panel, let us please welcome on stage Christian Esguerra, a seasoned political journalist and an assistant professor of journalism at the University of Santo Tomas. He is the host of Facts First, a podcast that discusses and analyzes current events and issues in politics and governance. Welcome, Christian. We would also like to invite our panelists, Justice Antonio Carpio and Senator Risa Hontiveros, along with the authors of the book, Ms. Marites Vitug and Ms. Camille Elemia. So I'm turning it over to you, Christian.
Thank you very much for that warm introduction, Mr. Paterno Ismael, who happens to be my co-faculty member at the University of Santo Tomas journalism program. It's nice to see him and other familiar faces this afternoon. Honestly, I was surprised because I was thinking this was a much smaller affair. But I just realized that given the importance of this book, given the immense contribution of this literature to our understanding of Duterte's damage, a lot of people turn out despite the bad weather. So again, I'm Christian Esguerra, and I'll be moderating this discussion this afternoon. The first part will be a discussion with the co-authors, Justice Carpio and Senator Risa. And for the second part, we will be fielding questions from a fine mix of audience available or who turned up this afternoon. So microphones will be available, I think. So let's start off with the title. Honestly, I'd like to first congratulate the co-authors because, as mentioned by our esteemed guests, this is a very important contribution, and many of us had been waiting for this. So congratulations. And I was curious whether you considered another subtitle, because you were talking about treachery. Perhaps you might have considered how Duterte sold the Philippines to China. Anyway, kidding aside, let's deconstruct first the concept of love that you talked about in this book. Was it really more of a love or admiration for China? Because when I went through your book, you talked about the origins of that admiration toward China. But looking back, do you think this has more to do with a former president who became a willing party to the scam, other than just being a so-called love for another country? Marites?
Yeah, eventually he was a willing party, but in the beginning, he really, in the milieu, Camille went to Davao and did extensive research, as he can talk about it. But you could see that he really had good friends. He developed close friendships with mainland Chinese as well as Filipino Chinese. And one interesting thing about Davao is they have the biggest Chinatown in Mindanao, and that was under his rule as mayor. So there's this layer of him that's really close to Chinese Filipinos as well as Chinese. And then I think you can talk about the partly ideological, or maybe just because he was a student of Jose Maria Sison.
Yeah, it was more of a mixture of his personal experience, bad experiences with the US. Like, for example, because many of his friends would say that Duterte talagang gumaganti siya. We all know that by now. So what happened was he was rejected, like visa application. So it started with that. And then later on with the US, with the Mayring incident, if you're not familiar with it, it was an alleged CIA agent who blew up a hotel in Davao. And then there was supposed to be a promised investigation of the US, but it turned out that he was spirited away to the US. So that started it. And then since then, Duterte would oppose everything or most of the requests of the US to be done in Davao. And also we noticed that it was a mutual affair, at least between Duterte and the Chinese Filipinos, because that's his entry point towards his relationship or love for China. So it more or less in Davao, what happened was Duterte was in charge of the security and peace and order, but he left the wealthy businessmen to their own devices, which they very much appreciated. So Duterte for peace and order, and the Chinese groups, the Chinese Filipino and Chinese mainlander for the economy of the city. And that worked for Duterte because these people also supported him, political like campaigns, programs.
But did you also get the sense that the president really had the Philippine interest in mind in this so-called pivot to China? Or that this was perhaps part of a bigger plan, given the context of his relationship with China? That if I became president, automatically I would carry the country toward China.
I think there were signs early on because remember when he wasn't even he didn't even win yet. He already said something about against the U.S. and that he would actually move closer to Beijing. So it wasn't really a surprise, but the intensity of what happened, that was what was surprising for all of us.
Yeah, I think for Duterte, the personal was political. All his personal likes and dislikes, he projected into policy. So that was very clear, I think, with China.
Okay, I'll ask Senator Risa. You've been leading the investigation by the Senate into the Philippine offshore gaming operators. Let's talk about the damage, and then after this, I'll ask Justice Carpio. Based on your investigation so far, talk about the immense damage caused by this pivot to China by the former president. Let's say in the context of POGO, and previously, you also led the investigation into the so-called Pastilla scam.
Even the Pastilla scam was part of the Senate Committee on Women's investigation of POGOs. And now that you mention it, in a way, the unveiling the unveiling of the POGOs paralleled his administration. It was during his time that we practically had an open door policy to POGOs, and that's why we're grappling with their terrible effects until now. Honestly, every time we thought that we were about to wrap up the investigation, some new, may bagong lalabas na victim survivor magrereklamo or whistleblower magsusumbong about some new aspect, criminal aspect related to the POGOs. At first, it was POGO-related prostitution. Then it was illegal recruitment and detention of foreign women here in the Philippines. Tapos tumagal kami sa Pastilla scam. And now we're in the maybe the last phase of the investigation, pero ang daming mga kabuting lumalabas na na-spawn din ng POGOs, from human trafficking to cyber scamming to money laundering to even still the not yet laid to rest angle of espionage. And then, yun na nga, yung pagkasangkapan, yung pagkumodify ng Philippine citizenship for criminal intent. So, lahat nito, pinapasok ni Duterte nung panahon niya at hanggang ngayon, I mean, they've taken up and consolidated an inordinately powerful position, not just within our economy, but in the case of Guo Huaping or Mayor Alice Guo, perhaps some kind of beachhead in our politics as well.
Yeah, I'd like to add, pinag-uusapan nga namin ni Marites, before lumabas tong Alice Go and all the issue, narinig ko na to from the Davao local businessmen, not precisely about Alice Go, pero it's more of like, sinabi nila na the influx of mainland Chinese. So there are two groups, the Chinese Filipinos and the mainland Chinese. So the migrant Chinese, when they went to Davao, it's somehow parang nanganak ng iba't ibang klaseng negosyo within Davao. Some of them are illegal. Like they mentioned the building in the middle of Davao, Chinatown, wherein they served as agents for these mainlanders. Some of them through illegal means. They told me that they would also buy birth certificates, which was now happening. They also said na another way for these mainlanders to get access to opportunities, businesses, is to marry local Filipinos. So, narinig na. So, nung nangyari to kay Alice ko, parang, wow, naging national na pala.
Online, while observing the comments of Duterte adherents or supporters, to be mild about the term to be used this afternoon, they always defend the president and try to distance him from the Pogo controversy, saying that he didn't have any direct hand. Justice, what do you think? Would that be a fair view of that the president simply wanted more revenues for the government? That's why he accommodated these Pogos.
Well, first, the Pogo started during his presidency. There was no Pogo before his presidency, so that's one. Second, as being revealed now in the Senate investigation, his economic advisor, Michael Yang, is behind. The brother apparently funded the Bamban Pogo operation. Third, when he became president, as narrated in the book of Marites and Camille, the Pogo licenses were being issued by the different economic zones, no? Cagayan and other zones. But when Duterte became president, he consolidated it with PAGCOR. Only PAGCOR could issue. And of course, with PAGCOR, you see there in the rules that the license can be issued only to a Pogo operator that will cater to a foreign market, provided in that country, foreign country, gambling is allowed. So, but we all know that in China, gambling is illegal. And the embassy of China has repeatedly stated that. But, at that time, when you apply for a Pogo license, you must submit a document from China that you can operate Pogo online in China. Of course, nobody could get that because Pogo is illegal. But PAGCOR still allowed. PAGCOR could do that only if there's clearance from the president. I mean, I've been in the executive department for a long time, and you cannot do that if you are a PAGCOR president unless you clear that with the president of the Philippines. So Pogo could not have operated the way it operated until now without clearance from the president. So if you're looking for the who approved Pogo, it has to be the president.
Senator, what do you think? Will your investigation eventually lead to Rodrigo Duterte, similar to what happened during the Farmally investigation?
Similar to what almost happened in the formal investigation. It's just that we ran out of time to have enough evidence to state explicitly in the committee report and have enough of us in the Senate to sign it that there was evidence of Duterte's complicity in the Farmally scandal. I hope what we were not able to do in time then, we can do now in the Pogo investigation. Because Michael Yang's brother's name came up as one of the two holders of a joint account that funded the Pogo Hub in Bamban. And if the brother was there, very possibly Michael Yang was there. And if we establish that Michael Yang was part of the Pogos, there are interlocking directorates between various Pogo companies and Pogo personalities, including companies where he is either the owner or some official. If we can establish that Michael Yang is part of the Pogos, then we will certainly try to research if therefore Duterte was part of the Pogos. And it would seem to stand to reason because he's the one who welcomed them with open arms into the country.
With respect to Farmally, DBM is actually under the office of the president. It's not under DBM. So it's legally, it's the president who has supervision and control over PSDBM ever since. So when President Duterte appointed Christopher Lau as head, he was the one directly supervising. He has supervision and control over Christopher Lau. It was not the DBM secretary. In fact, I think the DBM secretary at that time, Abisado, told the Senate that I don't have control. I don't have authority over PSDBM. It's under the president.
Again, speaking of the damage wrought by the Duterte presidency, let's go to the other obvious damage that he wrought in the West Philippine Sea. I'll ask Justice first. Looking back, because now we're seeing a different approach by the current administration toward China over the West Philippine Sea. But how would you assess the damage done by the Duterte administration when it comes to our interest in the West Philippine Sea?
Well, the bottom line during the Duterte administration, the arbitral award was frozen. In other words, the president refused to assert it, refused to enforce it, refused to convince other countries to support it. That's why during the Duterte administration, you did not hear countries like UK, the EU, even the US saying the award is binding and final on China and the Philippines. Compared to now, when they come out openly and say they support the arbitral award, China should comply with the arbitral award. So during that time, the way I look at it, the award was frozen. He just froze it. He said, I won't insist on this award because I need loans from China. I need investments from China. Of course, all of these investments hardly materialize, less than 3% materialize.
Let's go to the authors. You can answer that same question and one addition. Was it really part of the equation whenever Duterte tried to get some economic commitments from China that you should not make use of the arbitral victory? Was that made obvious in your investigation?
Wait, maybe I just wanted to add that damage brought by Duterte's pro-China policy was on the breakdown of the rule of law. When he was president, he himself allowed himself to be vaccinated. This is during the pandemic. He allowed himself to be vaccinated by a vaccine that was not approved yet by the Philippines. He allowed some of his aides, his guards, maybe one or two in the cabinet, to be vaccinated ahead of the frontliners. So there was this breakdown really in the rule of law. And we also know that his special envoy to China, Montulfo, wanted to do business by selling vaccines here. So that breakdown in upholding the rule of law can be seen during the pandemic in the West Philippine Sea as well.
Yeah, for the West Philippine Sea, we could say that there are some small wins. Like, for example, what Marites said in her opening remarks, that Filipinos were somehow, again, it's somehow allowed to fish within the, not within, near Scarborough Shoal, but of course, they're still under the mercy of the Chinese Coast Guard. But I think to your other question about, and also, sorry, add to that the Pag-asa, because Delphine Lorenzana was able to insist on the lengthening extension of the Pag-asa runway. But going back to your question about, is it really a requirement not to discuss the arbitral ruling when it comes to loans? Based on the conversations we had with finance officers or finance officers from the Department of Finance, it wasn't really discussed at all. It's just that coming from the president's statements, they didn't delve into that anymore because the president already said that, okay, we won't discuss, I won't use the arbitral award. So when they discuss with their Chinese counterparts, it's just business. They don't see the need for discussion.
Which brings us to the other problem. Perhaps Senator Risa can weigh in on this. Because supposedly there's no one saying when it comes to how a president should deal with another country. In this case, perhaps they can talk about the economic benefits while putting the South China Sea issue as a separate issue. But in this case, didn't you realize or somehow come to a conclusion that it's more about preserving this relationship with China despite what China had been doing against the Philippines in the West Philippine Sea?
And especially during Duterte's time, he liked to say, and the office of the president liked to say, or their communications people like to say, oh, you know, the Senate shouldn't speak so much about this because it's the president that's the architect of foreign policy. But the Senate cannot be prevented from speaking on these issues because we are also the treaty-making body. And in any case, the nuancing may be when our diplomatic corps, under the instruction of the president, deals with other countries. But in terms of what is the Philippine national interest, as he communicates it to us, the Filipinos, there should be no equivocation. But on so many occasions, as we read in the book, as we remember through media in those years, he practically committed treason. Just calling the arbitral ruling a piece of paper na sukat na lang itapon sa shredder or sa wastebasket. It's just too bad we don't have a law about treason in peacetime. It only covers during times of war. But in principle, what he did repeatedly was treason.
I think, Justice, you have a legal opinion on that, right? You could not call him out for possible impeachment because he's no longer president. But we could still, I mean, the Filipino people could still run after Duterte, right? Can you talk about that?
Well, there is a provision in the Anti-Graft and Corrupt Practices Act that a public officer could be liable for undue damage through negligence or willful act, undue damage to the government or the Filipino people. It's very broad. It can fall under that provision.
So if the Marcos administration is listening, that's another tool against your former BFF. Anyway, I ask one more question and then I'll open the floor to questions from the audience. Another elephant in the room is the idea that President Duterte might have been the Manchurian candidate in 2016. Your thoughts on this? Let's start with the authors. Manchurian candidate.
It's a very difficult question to answer because we've been hearing about it for years, but it's hard to find, because as journalists, of course, we need proof, right? But what I can say is, talking to the Chinese Filipinos in Davao, they have been really supportive of the Dutertes. They have been funding it, and they themselves have seen many Chinese nationals there during elections, like during mayoralty elections and all that. But to actually say that Duterte is the Manchurian candidate, it's difficult to answer that.
Senator or Justice?
Well, at the start of the 2016 presidential election, Duterte was in Palawan, and he said, that arbitral case, I do not believe in that. We should not have filed it against China. He said that. So I texted my friends, because I'm from Davao, I texted the people around Duterte. I said, binuo ko itong 6 na taon. Pag hindi niya bawiin yung sinabi niya, I'll come out against him even firm in the Supreme Court. 2 days later, they came out with a press statement. Duterte is 100% for the arbitral award. Oh, I said, wow, talagang he listens to people. And then during the debate, he said, I will jet ski to Scarborough Shoal, hamunin ko yung Chinese guard doon, barilan tayo. And then, when he became president, he said, stupid kayo pag naniwala kayo sa akin. Hindi nga ako marunong lumangoy. So, from the very start, Duterte was really with China. Because he said, yung arbitral case na yan, mali yan. That was his first position. And then after he won, that was also his position. That's the way I look at it. Thank you.
And speaking of, again, it's understandable, it's very difficult to find out for sure whether someone was a Manchurian candidate because by its very nature, it's supposed to be clandestine. But the idea of another Duterte, someone very much in awe of China, how do we prevent someone like that in the 2025 and 2028 elections, Senator?
That's all our work. In the opposition, we've been preparing for 2 years, for next year and for 2028. But here I will follow the good example of the journalists. We should not aver things for which we don't have the evidence right now. But just thinking that if I were China and I have this ambitious geopolitical agenda in the region and even in the world, if the other countries around me and who are claimants in the West Philippine Sea and who are in alliance with other countries aside from me, China, are holding their regular elections, if I had the chance, would I support the more friendly candidate or candidates? Of course I would. Given also based on what limited things we can read and learn about Xi Jinping, his own ambitions for his country and people. So I think since we grew up reading and watching the Manchurian Candidate, we cannot help but worry about that if it has happened before, that it will recur. Simply because, of course, China also has her designs on how friendly the political friendly the political systems in other countries in the region and the world can be towards her. So it's not an unreasonable thing to worry about for us.
Just a quick one before we go to the questions. I think it's not just the national elections that we should worry about, because based on our field work, because the Chinese government knows that, like for example, the institutions are already somehow resilient to their influence, so they go directly straight to the communities, to the provinces, and some of the politicians in the provinces are actually in good graces with them. So I think we should not just focus on the national elections.
And everything can start with promoting greater awareness regarding this problem. So we're now opening the floor to questions from the audience who would like to ask the first question.
For anyone who has a question, please feel free to walk towards a microphone. We will have time for around 3 questions. Please keep your questions brief. Please state your name, your affiliation, if any, and the person to whom you would like to address your question.
I'm Leona. I'm a college student, so I don't really have affiliations here. But I wanted to ask this question generally to everyone, and it's given that the public sentiment towards China's aggression is mostly negative, like, why don't you think that's translating into large-scale criticism towards Duterte? Yeah, that's for anyone in the room. Thank you.
na-convert ba yung anti-China sentiment toward Duterte? Pwede na mag-speculate, hindi naman foundation.
Yeah, thank you, Leona, for that question. I think I'd like to look at it from the other side because we keep on talking about how Duterte kept on trying to shift the alliances of the Philippines, right? But because the Philippine public, the Filipinos, are not, don't want to follow that. So, kasi nga, grabe yung inherent distrust natin of China. So, Duterte is not effective. And that leads me to my next point na whoever sits as president, kasi hindi naman natin hawak if he or she will be pro-China or kung ano man ang status niya. Pero if we have a solid Filipino electorate or public who is aware of what's happening, then hindi magiging transferable kung ano yung gustong gawin ng nakaupo sa mga tao.
And maybe just a quick point. Why do people still like Duterte despite his pro-China policy? I don't think that foreign policy figures in people's minds when they vote for candidates. It may be a very minor number. That's why it's separated from Duterte as a person and foreign policy. As you know, the Pulse Asia does annual surveys, and the 5 top concerns, wala dun yung foreign policy. So yeah, I've been puzzling about that also. Why is Duterte so popular despite his pro-China policy?
Yes, it's a big puzzle because all the surveys showed that even during the time of Duterte, when he was president, the 80% of the Filipino people wanted the arbitral award asserted. It never went below 80%. But Duterte's popularity was never hurt by that. Duterte remained popular. I think the Filipino people is not blaming Duterte for the actions of China. They are blaming China. That's the way I look at it. So we have not been successful so far in explaining to the people that Duterte is also responsible for that. We have not yet succeeded in explaining to the Filipino people. Thank you.
Just a small addition. Indeed, the surveys, recent surveys show that arguably the Filipino sentiment against China in the West Philippine Sea and for asserting Filipino national interest in the West Philippine Sea arguably is the single most unifying issue, the surveys would show. But, and we feel this especially every time we're preparing for elections, and especially now, still the top of mind or heart or stomach issues are the economic. So even on the economic front, we still have to show how Duterte's misgovernance was responsible for that and how it's so tied in also with the issues of corruption, including in the POGOs.
Next question, please.
Hi, good afternoon po. I'm Jerome from Cebu. Just happened to drop by. My question po is in relation to unrequited love. With love, we tend to ignore the biggest red flag that we have seen, which is in this case, China. My question would be, is it better to have this unrequited love with China, or are we better off with the complicated love that we had with the US? Because before the election of Duterte, there were dominance of questions that our relationship with other foreign nations is somewhat questionable. Then after his election, I mean, I disagree with this one as well. But as a small country as the Philippines, as human as we are, we're bound to love someone. So is it better to have the unrequited love with China or with a complicated, complex, user-friendly love with the United States? Thank you.
I don't think it's an either or. I think leaders should be able to navigate relations with both powers or superpowers, middle powers. And you know why it's unrequited love? Because Duterte refused, he's not listening. Duterte refused to uphold international law. He refused to abide by the 2016 ruling. So that in itself is really a violation of what we stand for. If you stand for justice, you stand for equality. So that's why we don't need to choose. We just have to really, as a leader, you have to navigate, as said, relations between the superpowers. And I don't think we are a pawn in the US-China rivalry. We have our own national interests, and neither of that lies with the US or China.
There is only one country in the world that is aggressively encroaching, seizing our territory and maritime zones, and that is China. The US is not seizing our territories or maritime zones. No other country except China. So we have to address this, because if we lose our island territories and maritime zones to China, we lose that forever. You cannot get it back from a nuclear armed power. So we have to make a stand now. This is the issue really. If we cannot keep it, then we lose it forever.
Let's not be trapped between choosing between staying with China or going back to the US. I've always said a bigger coalition is a better coalition. So let's consolidate all those individual countries and regional formations that, as Justice said earlier, have been declaring their support for us, and find the ways politically and diplomatically to compel China to cease and desist her unacceptable actions against us, and to compel her to abide by a rules-based approach to conflict resolution and to the enjoyment of all the peoples of the world, of the whole of the South China Sea. And even between the US, our old ally, so this renewed relationship with her, then we have to define it as a new relationship between equals. No more little brown brother, a renewed relationship between equals in the context of multilateral relationships with like-minded nations, at least at this point in time, this conjuncture.
Next question, please.
Good afternoon. Juanis Berto, former colleague of Marites at Business Day. Two questions, please. One for Justice Carpio and the other one for Marites. One, first, Justice, you have spoken in the past about it now is a good time to file another arbitral case, this time regarding the environmental destruction caused by China, West Philippine Sea. Could you elaborate on that? And what is the prospect of us doing that within a fairly short period of time? And then second, to Marites and everything, you've written 2 books already about what China has been doing in the West Philippine Sea. But now we're seeing what they are doing on Philippine land, buying up large estates, winning electoral contests. Isn't it time to write the 3rd book? Yun lang po. Excuse me.
Yes, I said that we can file an arbitration case against China for the environmental damage in Skoda Shoal, Sabina Shoal. But that requires a marine scientific assessment that the destruction was caused by man and not by typhoon or tsunami or earthquake. And we don't have that yet. No? My suggestion is we get a marine scientific study by foreign experts and local experts. We have 2. In the meantime, we filed our extended continental shelf claim of the west coast of Palawan, and China opposed it. This is the case that's ripe now for arbitration because under the rules of the UN Commission on the Limits of the Continental Shelf, if there is an opposition, the Commission will not act on the matter. The parties must agree, or either mutually by voluntary agreement. If they cannot agree, then one of them will have to file an arbitration case. And in our case, we are claiming, because from our EEZ of the coast of Palawan, we can still claim an extended continental shelf claim that will overlap with the claim of Vietnam and Malaysia. But China has no basis because China is more than 350 nautical miles away from this area. And under UNCLOS, the maximum that a country can claim is up to 350 nautical miles. Hainan is more than 350 nautical miles from this area of the coast of Palawan, west coast of Palawan. So we can file an arbitration case against China on the sole issue, does China have a claim over this area under UNCLOS? Of course, the ruling will be no, because it's very obvious. China cannot raise the 9-dash line again because that was already invalidated by the July 12, 2016 award, which said China cannot use the 9-dash line to claim waters or resources. And the guru of China on the South China Sea, Wu Shikon, recently said the arbitral award of July 12, 2016 has a negative impact on China that can never be erased. And we should not allow the Philippines to file another arbitration case. China is in dread of another arbitration case that we will file. So that's exactly what we will do. And the opportunity is there because they opposed our claim. And if we want a resolution, we have to file an arbitration case. If we don't file, then that will be unresolved forever. We cannot allow that. We really have to file. So my suggestion now is to file this arbitration case against China on the extended continental shelf claim off the west coast of Palawan. Thank you.
Another book. He was asking about another book.
Siguro that's for Senator Risa to write. So much information already
Committee
came from
report
the
lang po
Senate.
ako.
That was a vibrant discussion. We would like to thank our panelists, our moderator, Christian Esguerra, our panelists, Justice Antonio Carpio and Senator Risa Hontiveros, and of course, our authors, Marites Vitug and Camille Elemia. Let's give them a round of applause. We would like to invite our speakers now, our panelists, for a photo opportunity on stage. May we request the panelists to remain on stage for a photo opportunity, followed by a photo opportunity with the two authors of the book. May we request the two co-authors to stay on stage for a photo op. The authors of Unrequited Love, Marites Vitug and Camille Elemia, congratulations. There is one more person we will need to hear from before we end the program. She is an accomplished writer, editor, columnist, and publisher. In the last decade, she has served as the director of the Ateneo Library of Women's Writings, director of the University Communication and Public Relations Office of Ateneo, and Director of the Ateneo de Manila University Press. Let us all welcome Dr. Rica Bolipata Santos.
Let me just say that if there is a third book, please give it to the Ateneo Press. Promise na yan, Marites. When Marcos was coming back into power, the press was quick to publish Conjugal Dictatorship, Some Are Smarter Than Others, and the Marcos Era, reminding the public that history was about to repeat itself. And now here we are. In 2017, a year into the Duterte presidency, the Ateneo Press published a Duterte Reader, which was probably one of the first books about the notorious mayor from Davao. Readers marveled at how quick we were able to put together such a book so topical while others were still reading from the spate of killings and remained in apprehensive alliance with the government. Which is why we need the work of journalists and the work of academics, the work of writers, the work of social scientists, the work of dreamers, the work of activists, and the work of heroes. We need people to get to the bottom and middle and top of things. We need people to study us and study history and our history and tell us a story of why we are, where we are, and who we are. Whatever for, the pessimist might ask, so that we can untangle the knots of all these complicated questions and perhaps re-knot or discover new ways of anchoring our values. As Father Jack Carroll, a Jesuit, said, there's so much to be done and there's so little time, and that sense of urgency must always inform our work. The press is brave and we cannot not be brave, but thankfully we are not alone. The press is grateful for our unstoppable authors and editors who respond to the times, who keep vigil for truth and social justice, often at the expense of their own other dreams or plans, and even sometimes their lives. Truth-telling is not for the faint of heart. Marites Vitug, for example, published with the Ateneo Press her book Rock Solid, How the Philippines Won Its Maritime Case Against China, barely 2 years after the landmark ruling at The Hague. Last year, she published with us the revised edition of her groundbreaking Power from the Forest, The Politics of Logging, as a sordid reminder that not much has changed about our forestry since the book was released in 1993. In this vein, Marites and Camille hold the line through their fearless reportage of the past administration's romance with Beijing, tracing the genealogy of the recent exposés on mayors with questionable citizenships and hectares of pogo compounds. I think it is important that Vitug and Elemia chose to couch their book in the romance genre, for it is a narrative of unequal relations that border on martyrdom, the lovelorn character pining for some powerful object of desire. Nobody ever wins in such a genre. The title gestures to us the affective dimension that is commonly overlooked in our political analysis. Ultimately, through riveting, well-researched accounts, the book gives us a story of betrayal and a cautionary tale about love. The Ateneo University Press lives on that line we made for ourselves in our work. We are the supreme expression of the university's commitment to nation building, and this we do in making sure that we publish books that help us build a better nation. And this kind of love, the love of country, we throw caution to the wind and help all of us who want the truth. After all, in truth, nothing is unrequited. And so we thank you, Marites and Camille. We thank the authors, and we thank you, the readers, for being here today. We shall be brave together. And remember, even as it is frightening, today is a triumph because a book has been born. Thank you and good evening.
Thank you, Dr. Bolipata Santos, for those words of hope. It's been an afternoon of intriguing discussion, filled with difficult yet important truths, ones that must inform us as we face the future. Thank you to everyone who attended this book launch. The book will officially be available to the public beginning Friday, July 19, 2024, on the official Ateneo de Manila University Press website and Shopee and Lazada stores. You will find the links on the screen. Be sure to let everyone know that you know when the book launches tomorrow. I'm sure that you are now all itching to get a copy of the book yourselves, or 2 or 3 or 10 copies for your family and friends. It is, of course, available for purchase at 15% off, 465 pesos today at the Ateneo Press table over there. So take advantage of the special discount, and the offers will be available to sign your book copies here by the stage. Please stay seated as food will now be served. Feel free to purchase your books and have them signed anytime. Thank you once again and enjoy the rest of the evening.
Dahil wala silang ano. That's unfortunate. Ito for attorneys.
My sister, kasi ibibigay ko sa kanya after ko basahin. For Ara, A-R-A-H.
Attorney Susan.
Siyempre po, this is for me po, yung nag-interview sa inyo. Yes, lumayo mo ako, ha? Hindi ako lumayo, ang layo lang yun. In fact, nung maliliit yung driver, doon ako pupunta dito. See, all because I go to you. Oh my gosh. This one was mine. Pero ito pa, sabi nga ni Camille, balutin daw kasi baka mabasa Hong Kong ito. Regalo sa Hong Kong.
For Vida, another face. Vida de Hong.
Hindi po ng balot ng hopya. Umuulan ng hopya. We'll catch up po, ah. Take care po.
My son, Lino.
Yeah, that's for them. Ito ang
Madala mo ka. Hindi, lawyer naman yan. Si lawyer. Thank you, Marites Vitug. Ay, kailan. Kaya nauna na ako. Thank you so much. Wow, present.
Dami-dami yan.
Thank you. Karen.
That's for me. It's for my library.
Thank you, Camille.
Bahala ka na. Why?
Thank you so much.
R-E-S-T-I. Why? This is for my boss. Dito, Gourmet. Dito, Gourmet. Spicy. Thank you. Isa sa akin, ito sa akin. This is mine. Assign lang. Assign lang to. I got my...
Ang hirap yung mag-confirm eh.
Actually, timing lahat. So, it's good. And this one. Last lap.
Sign lang ito.
Yeah. Yeah, madami sila. Thank you, and congratulations, Camille. And the next book, just let us know.
So this is Hannah. She's also with the
See you.
Ako, sa Troy